Go ahead. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on giving and getting feedback. I'm Tom Holmes. I'm the Director of Business Development at HelloTeam, and I'm very excited to be joined today by HelloTeam's one and only Chief Revenue Officer, Peter Padovano.
It's nice seeing all and partaking in this webinar about, giving feedback and receiving it, and really driving the most valued lesson that I've learned in terms of educating and developing people, but more importantly, driving the right success for one's organization through that feedback. So thank you for allowing me to partake, Tom.
Awesome. So just a couple notes before we get started. Just so you know, people will both be dialed in and, joining virtually on Zoom here for the webinar. So we're going to have some Q&A at the end. Feel free throughout the webinar to put your questions in the Q&A panel on Zoom. If you're calling in, you can feel free to email them to us at the same email that sent you over the webinar notes. Also wanted to let everybody know that both the recording and the slides will be sent via email from our team about 1 to 2 days. So the weekend coming up, we'll try to get it out tomorrow. If not, you'll see it first thing on Monday. Just so you know, everybody is muted on this webinar except for Peter and myself, so you get to listen to us exclusively. And I also wanted to let you know this webinar is approved for SHRM and HRCI credit today. So what that's going to mean is as long as you stay the full hour, we'll be showing it in the last 5 minutes or so to give you those codes, but we're unable to send them after the fact. So make sure you take a photo with your phone or take a screenshot on your computer. That way you're able to get the codes and submit them for credit. So with that, why don't we kick it off and talk about, why we're here today. So we've all heard it before, any relationship, you need communication. And this is especially true when you think about your managers, your employees, and even your company overall. So with Peter here, Peter has, close to 20 years of HR and payroll experience, is definitely our own on-site expert on this subject. Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it means to actually give feedback to an employee and what that process looks like?
Yeah, and when I think about feedback, this goes for any type of organization, Tom. It could be manufacturing companies, it could be publicly traded companies, or even an SMB client. And I sit down with customers all the time to figure out how you give sometimes feedback that will be constructive and lead to the results that you're looking to achieve for the organizations, in terms of the ultimate success of the organization, but also the development of the most valued asset you have, your employees. And that's always a challenge for a lot of folks because of one main reason. Sometimes people don't know how to communicate it. Sometimes they don't know how to memorialize it. And sometimes you have to also be willing to receive feedback as the manager. And that's always sometimes a challenge because it's easy to give feedback that might be, hey, you're not hitting KPI targets, which is not the case for Tom, or not hitting revenue targets, or not achieving results in terms of a win for the organization. Sometimes you have to give the proper coaching and learn from others around you. And that's why I always tell folks, the feedback that one gives, they have to be willing to also equally receive it from their employees. So this way it builds up and fosters a great winning culture.
Absolutely. And, just so you know, a quick disclaimer, some of what we do here at HelloTeam is we actually provide an all-in-one engagement and performance management platform. So really what that means is we're here to facilitate more regular feedback with employees, track things like goals, but also do performance reviews, which is really a lot of what we're here to talk about today. So, what mistake a lot of people make, and I hear it a lot, Peter, and you just brought it up, it's a great point, is that, feedback needs to be consistent. So a lot of companies, even ones that we talk to every day, are still doing annual performance reviews. And I think it's critical that people move to a more quarterly or a regular process, or at least that you have something in place that you're able to give employees, for example, a one-on-one. You're able to have those conversations on a more regular basis, but also tracking things like goals. So, to give you guys kind of a visual, and we'll use, some tools to back that up today. If everybody's able to see my screen here, I'll be switching sharing a little bit.
I can.
Perfect. So some of the tools you might want to use to give feedback might include performance reviews, but it also might include goals. So Peter, when people are setting goals, do you see them including things like metrics underneath it, or do you see more companies these days just using a percentage-based goal?
I see percentage-based, I see binary, true or false, or depending on the role or department in the organization, it could be even based on number, in terms of like revenues, for example, for sales. A lot of times what I've seen a lot of prospects, even folks that I've worked for in the past outside of HelloTeam, prior to my days at HelloTeam, a lot of times people just don't have the visibility of what one department or what team member is doing. And sometimes it becomes a little too late to keep that person in place, or more importantly, to keep them engaged. Because a lot of times people are not understanding what their objectives are, don't have any way of measuring their success. And the value that I see, and this is pitching us a little bit, Tom, is that it's giving some sort of cadence and process around understanding what objectives are within one's organization. Those are what I consider SMART goals. Having it short and sweet in terms of things that could be achieved, having stretch goals, and saying to myself, I'm having a regular cadence that I'm sitting down with my boss or my direct reports to understand how do we achieve success on an individual basis as well as a team.
Absolutely. And you bring up a great point, Peter. I know one of the things Peter and I do at least once a week, not only with each other, but also with the people that work for us and in our department, is we have one-on-ones. So some of you might know, by the way, there's a poll out there. Feel free to answer those questions. Definitely, we're going to talk about those in a minute, but how your company's giving feedback, how you're giving feedback, and how you feel about that process. But as far as one-on-ones go, I think Peter brings up a great point in having that cadence where not only are you setting goals, but you're actually talking to employees about them as well and not waiting for a review to come out. So, one of the things that I think can be incredibly useful is if you have a regular form set up for one-on-ones, and this can be through a tool like you're seeing now, but I think you can also use a piece of paper. You can definitely use a tool like a Slack or a Microsoft Teams, or you can use a digital tool like this that actually will integrate with systems like Slack and Teams. Whatever you do, it's just important, I think, that the feedback's recorded in a way that not only the employee and the manager can see, but definitely all of you on this call as HR professionals can see. And I think what's useful is if you have those goals readily available on these calls, because it's going to give you insight into not only whether or not the goals are being done, but if the employee's struggling. I think Peter and I have the most productive conversations when we do things like look at our sales pipeline and talk about individual accounts, things that I might be struggling on or our team might be struggling on. So it's really about providing sort of the place for them to have productive conversations and then letting both the manager and the employee use their expertise to kind of guide the conversation. I will tell you one thing I particularly like is having the ability to edit goals during a one-on-one. So using this time to actually not only talk to someone like Peter about what our goals are going to be, but actually input them live so we can set them up and we can start tracking them and spend less time thinking about how we're going to get them out and cascade them to the team.
And just to point out one thing too, Tom, a lot of times when we speak to HR folks that are on the call, they'll say, look, we have a payroll provider, we have an HR system that can do something similar. A lot of times payroll providers and HR systems, they're good for, housing employee data or running someone's payroll or merit increases. What we're focused on is managing performance and engagement. That's the real value. You need a system and you need folks like us that could be the experts and basically the sounding board to figure out what should I incorporate during a one-on-one conversation? What SMART goals should we cascade in a system? What kind of questions should we give in terms of performance reviews? That's the real value of using a system, any system like a HelloTeam or other systems that are out there. The value is really having that process, but also being able to capture that so that this way you can figure out how to properly coach, train, and develop people so that it ultimately leads to that success of the company and advances people within the organization.
Absolutely. And we do have a poll out there about this. So it's a good point you bring up, Peter. So we did ask the group, how you're currently giving feedback to employees and how you're completing performance reviews. And I was surprised to see that most people are doing all three things. They're doing face-to-face chats, they're doing one-on-ones, they're doing reviews. But what I think was more surprising is 60% of the group that answered these questions are still using paper to do performance reviews. And that's something I know Peter and I see every day. It's something that a lot of companies are doing, far and wide. And, where I think it lacks is that you have a performance review that's filled out on paper and that's great. But then what happens to it? It gets filed away, gets lost. It's only looked at once a year, and it's not really kind of driving the feedback you might want to see. So I think having a tool can be very useful in this. You can have a tool that even measures, or even just a form that measures things on a scale rating, open-ended questions. Peter, what kind of questions do you see people involving in their performance reviews today?
Well, it really depends on the industry you're talking about and depends on the workforce that we're segmenting. So a lot of times manufacturing companies, they're going to ask questions in regards to like safety trainings or any type of like development of the individual to make sure that there's less risk involved in terms of what they're doing on the floor in terms of a warehouse, for example, compared to a tech company or, any type of CRM company or sales company that they're trying to hit certain metrics. And so a lot of times when I'm dealing with professional service companies or tech companies or life science companies, I'll sit down with them to figure out what kind of questions are elicited in terms of like hitting specific goals, hitting goals around development. How do they work well with others amongst themselves, like doing a 360, for example, to that of just understanding how I can advance a person and align the goals for that advancement. And as you can see on this page, we're aligning goals side by side to the performance review questions that are being solicited to those individuals. So that this way, as time goes on, we can receive analytics around improvement or regression on those employees. That's the value of going away from paper to using a SaaS platform like HelloTeam.
Absolutely. And you bring up a great point, Peter, about analytics and insights. So I think one of the biggest takeaways that we want all of you to have from today's webinar is it's not just a matter of giving employees feedback, but it's what you do with the feedback after it's been given, right? So how are you measuring on that? How are you using data to inform, is this employee doing well? How are they going to do next year? And are they ready for that next step in their career? Are we ready to retain them by giving them the growth that they're seeking and also making sure their performance is in line with their job? So, it's really good once you have a performance review completed that you take all that information, all the things you're measuring, and you put it into a way, even automatically like this, a system like ours will do, where you can have it charted out. You can see what scores look like. You can see distributions of those scores. It's really about identifying the top performers who might be all the way, to the right and ready for that next step, but also not losing sight of people in the middle and at the bottom of the scale who might need a little bit more coaching or a little bit, more advice or guidance to get ahead.
The other thing too, Tom, it's not just about performance reviews or cascading goals or even doing one-on-ones. You want to elicit anonymous feedback as well from the employees. So things like net promoter scores, to that of onboarding surveys or exit interviews. Conducting surveys, I think, are going to be equally important because, again, it's giving me the anonymous feedback that I need so that this way I can continue the growth of my company.
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to switch over to the getting feedback from employees in a little bit, but it's just some takeaways too from this section. So make sure that you're listening and taking notes on what employees have to say, whether that be in a one-on-one, whether that be, through a performance review. Make sure that you're giving them the feedback, but also making sure that they're receiving the feedback and understanding it and what's expected of them as you go forward. Definitely when you have these types of conversations, it's good to preview, their upcoming projects, their upcoming job responsibilities, anything that's going to change. You can actually incorporate that into the performance review form, but it's definitely good if you reserve it for a one-on-one as well to have a more constructive discussion and give that regular feedback. So Gallup did find, by the way, and this is an interesting stat that I told Peter this morning I wanted to include in here, that companies actually were 9% more profitable after doing regular performance reviews. So this is a real business impact, right? It's not just about, actually giving feedback and getting feedback from employees. It's about what the business impact is to your company, and definitely something I'm sure all of your CFOs would want to hear and how you make that case for, not only having a system, but processes behind it. And this is the case. By giving more regular feedback, by getting more regular feedback from employees, whether it be through that net promoter score or through the performance reviews, it's going to lead to higher profitability at the company. I know we live and breathe this every day. So Peter, aside from, sort of the performance things and the one-on-ones and all of that, what are some ways that internally, even at HelloTeam, we're managing our team and getting feedback from them, whether it's through, surveys and all the stuff we do here?
Well, things like even having an anonymous suggestion box, to that of being able to voice opinions, also giving peer recognition to one another. That's a simple way of just having a water cooler effect, even though we're in a hybrid workforce, whereby we're mostly remote employees. And a lot of times people want to feel like there's collaboration, even though I might not be sitting across from Tom, for example. I speak to him probably 6 to 7 times a day in terms of, like everything from like forecasts for revenues to that just of getting to know him on a personal level and making sure that he continues his development and growth in the organization. So I always tell folks, it doesn't always have to be basing it on metrics, but sometimes giving cheer, recognition along the way for a job well done for others. And that's why I like about tools like this, that it's almost like an intranet, whereby I know the milestones that are going on within a company. I know that when someone's advancing internally, I've always found it, sometimes, when I worked at big companies, hey, they brought someone outside the organization to become a leader instead of growing homegrown talent. Again, the value to me is you're able to hone in on people more effectively through tools like this and eliminate certain processes that are paper driven, and then allow collaboration to really become more enriched and more valuable because you're investing in your employees. Because the value here is you're able to get data points that are going to be relevant in terms of growth, the peer recognition, so that there's more collaboration internally to retain talent. But then more importantly, knowing one's job duties, no matter where you are in the workplace, if it's in an office or remote, adds value to one staff. And that's how I look at a tool like this. It's really giving you better insight on your workforce, but giving back to your most valued asset, as I mentioned, your employees.
Absolutely. And, one of the great ways, especially at the level of management, not even just HR, to get feedback from your employees can be through something like a 360 review, right? So there's all different sorts of performance reviews. This is oftentimes called a peer feedback review, but some of the ways I see people getting feedback, it's really three, right? So it's a performance review that's just a straight top down. But then you also have some companies today that are still doing top-down performance reviews, but also incorporating what we call a self-evaluation, with the employees kind of looking within and giving feedback on themselves as well. But the third, and the one that's really becoming more and more popular every day, it feels like, is the 360 review. And that's really where you're going to have a process that not only are you getting feedback, when you look at employee feedback, not only is it coming from a manager and is it coming from the report themselves, but also from their peers or people with completely unrelated job functions that are rating that person as a colleague. So it's important that managers, when they're trying to get feedback from employees about how they're managing them, but also how this employee is doing, that they're incorporating the peers in that process. And what can be helpful, again, is using data to kind of inform those different things. So you might want to, after you have a performance review done, look at something like a feedback report, right? So really dig in and see, what did each person who reviewed an individual have to say about them? Were they their peer? Were they their manager? How do these ratings compare to the last time that this review was given to that employee? Are they getting better, or hopefully never getting worse in their performance? You want to be able to chart that over time. But then what Peter mentioned, and what's so important, is that you have a way, like the suggestion box, to let employees give management feedback and give the company feedback anytime that they might want to. That really goes to the second part of what we're here to talk about today. So with that, I'm going to hop back over to the slides here and talk about surveys. So surveys are a great way for companies to actually get feedback, aside from a suggestion box that might be more of a paper-based thing, and really do something a little more regular that digs into your culture, identifies problems, and looks for solutions. So some of the ways that you can do a survey, obviously we're all familiar with, the print it, fill it out, kind of drop it in a folder type of thing. But you also have more and more tools coming out, ours being one of them, where you're able to go online, make it interactive, fill out, get feedback, and then use data behind that. So what can be great, and I know some of you are SHRM certified that are here today, SHRM definitely has some great resources on how to do these surveys effectively and what questions should look like. And also companies like HelloTeam, we actually give you a bunch out of the box that you're able to use. I think at a minimum, what I see most companies doing, and Peter, I don't know what your feedback on this, is at least getting what we call an NPS score and a net promoter score. I think it's the most basic level of measuring feedback at a company. And it's really just asking someone, would you recommend working here, to a friend or a colleague, right? And this question, even though it seems simple, is really powerful. You're actually going to be able to get insight from this about, is this the kind of workplace that someone would recommend? And then you can start to build on this survey, ask more questions to figure out why they may or may not feel that way. So it's important to not only have a template that maybe you grab off the internet, but even one that you can actually add your own questions, kind of make it custom to you, and really one that aligns with what you're trying to measure. So I think not only doing surveys is important, but the frequency is equally as important. So it's important that, just like with performance reviews, you have a cadence of surveys, because oftentimes what happens is companies every 5-10 years will go ahead and give a survey, but then they won't look at the results and they won't actually act on what they're getting as feedback, or do the survey again to see, aside from this baseline score, are we improving and are people happier working here as a company? So it's really important that you send these out frequently. It can be overkill. We don't want to make anyone think that you should be doing these every day or every week. You certainly can, but even monthly, quarterly, even every 6 months is reasonable. And another good tip is to actually take this and tailor it to the kind of survey you're giving. So obviously something like a major engagement score or a benefits review is going to happen once a year, where something like, would you recommend us to a friend or a colleague, can happen every month or every quarter. It's a great way to build sort of different types of surveys to get all the feedback you need without bombarding people at the end of the year with a 30 or 40 question survey. And I know what Peter loves about our tool, and I love this too, is that we actually give you analytics. And, regardless of how you do a survey, it's really important that you look at the results. That's the only way you're going to know what's wrong. But then it's even more important that you act on the results. And we'll talk about that in a second. So looking at results from a survey, you're definitely going to want to break it down. Seeing things overall, I think, is just a high level overview is not as useful as really digging in and saying, does a certain department feel differently? Do people that are managed by a certain person feel differently? Do people that are in a certain office feel differently than those in another office? So high level, definitely look at the answers, see how it breaks down across your base so you know what the normal looks like. But then get into detail and really try to get a sense of, are people feeling this way throughout, or are different departments actually feeling different about the way that we're handling culture at the company and managing them? So you can see we have a survey here that's sort of a template survey where you can kind of compare different groups. So some of the trends we're tracking is, how does finance, engineering, and customer success feel against the whole company, right? And you can see this is pretty in line with how everyone else feels. But if we actually dig deeper and we filter this down to just look at how engineering feels versus the rest of the company, you're going to notice there might be some gaps as you go through different questions. You can see some people here actually did not feel disagreeing with this particular question about open, honest, and transparent communication as much as the companies did overall. So what this would tell me as an HR professional is engineering has really good communication within their team. Maybe they feel the company is communicating with them very well as well. But you might have some other segments in here that don't feel that way. And it's important to get to the bottom of those things. So we did launch oh, go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, the other thing that I find valuable too, Tom, is that a tool like ours, compared to a lot of other providers out there, there are SurveyMonkey, other survey tools around culture. What I like about our tool is the benchmarks.
Absolutely.
Because it's allowing me to benchmark my company based on the industry that I'm in. And a lot of companies are looking for that, because then they can hire, retain talent, also know who my competition is, and making sure that I'm hitting the certain scores that I want in terms of, keeping my employee staff happy, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And this is a newer feature of HelloTeam that we just released. And definitely for those of you out there that want to get really advanced and not only see how you're doing internally, but even benchmark yourself against other companies of your industry and your size, definitely something that you would need a tool to do, but something definitely HelloTeam does really well. Say that in a non-biased way. And when you look at benchmarking, it's really important that you're seeing not only how does your company do versus other companies, but again, getting in depth at that department level, seeing how people feel along with values or, that you might have, things like teamwork, transparency, but being able to look at that to see if different departments feel different ways compared to others in your industry. So you can see an example of this here. This is a company that is in media and entertainment, and the average score in that segment is 73% as an overall engagement score. They have 80%. So that's really good. They're above the mark there. But if you dig deeper and you go deeper beyond the surface, you're going to see that when it comes to things like belonging, communication, feedback, environment, teams like our finance team actually feels less than what would be industry average. So those are ways that as an HR professional, you're going to be able to get very targeted in what your action plan is. And also that you're going to get feedback in a way that you're really able to see, how do we make this a best place to work? So Peter brought up milestones, and I think that's a really important thing. We did run a poll real quick, and I'm happy to go over this about how you're getting feedback from employees before we hop into this piece. And, Peter, what I was surprised by is 46% of people said it was just casual conversation. Does that surprise you? Do you see a lot of people using a tool to do surveys and things like that? Or do you feel like most people are still out there just kind of having face-to-face conversations?
It's a kind of combination of both, because the thing is, some companies who've had retention problems, especially with COVID hitting, making sure that people feel engaged, they'll use a system, or they'll bring in a consulting firm to figure out what the challenges are that they're facing to keep their talent. And nowadays it's more of, utilizing a tool to hone in on the people who could, drive the revenues for a company, or that we should retain them as talent, because now companies are going through the other opposite of not, trying to attract employees, but unfortunately, determine who might not be a fit for one's organization. So getting documentation, soliciting the right feedback from both ends, from management level to all levels of the organization, are critical for an organization's success, especially with the economic climates that we face. But that's gone hand in hand in all different types: inflation, recession, or stagflation, whatever you want to call the economic climates that we're facing right now. having better insight in terms of your workforce. Secondly, having the ability to get feedback and getting analytics around your employees help drive the goals and objectives that a company has. And from an HR perspective, you might say, what can I do for this? Having a tool or having a way of or a process around performance, being proactive with your employees, soliciting their feedback will make every level of the organization easier in terms of their jobs, especially when I sit down with CFOs all the time, Tom, not to digress, but they want to see reports around who retained, who's lost department staff members. How to get that intel is sometimes hard to find if you're doing it via paper or you're just doing it by word of mouth. But by getting analytics around your employee population, what department needs to open up recs for hiring, how do we attain that? This is allowing me to get better insight so that I can grow the business the more effective way.
Definitely. And we want to encourage everyone to ask questions. So put your questions in the Q&A button there on Zoom, and we'll definitely answer those as they come in. We might save a few for the end if they look like ones that we're going to kind of cover later, but definitely engage with us and put some questions in there. But Peter brought up a great point about how as HR can I develop a communication or a sort of feedback process in my company. So one of the most common fallacies that we will see when we do a survey with a company for the first time is people often feel like they're not communicated with. So the company actually communicating to employees is something many, many employees at all different sorts of companies of all sizes feel is lacking. And so having a tool is definitely a great idea. More important is having a process. So really sit and ask yourself, how am I sharing out the resources that employees might need? How am I informing them when something great happens at the company? One of the things Peter's famous for here at HelloTeam, not to put you on the spot, is whenever we have a new client come in or whenever sales is doing something, great, he'll put it on the news section of HelloTeam. And what happens when you have, a news section like this is after he posts it, everyone in the company's emailed. We have a mobile app, so we're getting pinged on our phones. We're getting told what's happening. It'll say like new client win, massage envy, which is one we brag about a lot here. And it will come up with a little explainer from Peter about who this person is and why they chose a system like HelloTeam. And it's really reassuring not only to sales, but to everybody in the company that they know what's going on. They're in the know. And if they want to comment on it, they want to engage with the post, they can do that as well. So having a way to share that out is very critical. Also, when it comes to things like events, you want to have a place where if you're regularly holding company events, you're driving employees to participate in those, whether that be, a company cookout or a virtual Zoom class. You're going to want to post those things in a place everybody can access it, everybody can see it. And lastly is going to be employee resources, right? So things that people need, the handbook, where we find our pay stubs. Even as a regular employee at a company, sometimes I don't know where to go if it's not posted on HelloTeam. It can be really difficult to get into those portals. It's really helpful to have a place where employees can go, whether it be an intranet or just, an email list or something in Google Drive that people can readily access, and that way you can increase the communication. The other thing I think Peter and I see, more and more every day is a lack of recognition in companies. And Peter brought this up when he talks about things like high fives. That's what we call it here at HelloTeam. But it's really important that you have a way to facilitate recognition of employees at your company. So when someone joins, think about when someone has a birthday or when someone has a work anniversary. What are your company's processes around making sure that employee is recognized? And this would really go into that employee to employee communication piece. So of course, being biased, a system like us, we track it automatically. We do tie into a lot of major systems like ADP, Bamboo HR, and many, many more on the way. We have some great partners there. And what this will do and what a sync like this would mean is that you don't have to think about recognizing someone or sending that email announcement when they come on board. You don't need to think about, am I going to remember their birthday? The system's going to remember all of that for you. It can even actually set up a newsletter. So when we talk about at least having that email list going, system like this can automate all that, put it into an automated newsletter where people are getting it. They're informed on what's happening. They're seeing the news of the company on a weekly or monthly basis. And you can see here, not only are we tracking milestones, but we also have this virtual peer-to-peer recognition feature. So I think it's very important. I'm seeing, especially in this remote environment, more and more companies make this a priority, that you have a place for employees to tell one another, great job. And a lot of companies started to try to do this on Slack or via email. But what happened? It became too noisy. So having a system can really help you focus on this, get a water cooler effect, as Peter mentioned, of the whole company, what people are doing and what they're helping each other out with. but also having a place not only to recognize people, but reward them as well. So one of the things that's becoming popular is giving out gift cards for things like company value awards, or for getting so much recognition during a quarter or hitting your major goals. We can definitely, as a company, help you facilitate that. But you can definitely implement something like this on your own if you're a smaller organization. You don't need to limit yourself to just saying, okay, we're going to email everyone for someone's birthday. Why not give a gift card? Why not make them, feel like they're valued and get a gift from the company or from their peers for all the recognition they're receiving? This is definitely something we see popular, and that's why we developed this sort of rewards catalog you're seeing right now. But Peter, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what companies are doing aside from gift cards, as far as prizes go or things employees can redeem that might be company specific.
So I've seen a lot of times internal swag, like jacket I'm wearing, it's representing HelloTeam, to that of even allocating points for redemption when it comes to PTO. So the value to me is, and again, I know we're showing a lot of the tools, so I always tell folks it's kind of a quasi discussion about feedback, and then what we've encompassed in terms of a system that's all encompassing. And again, everything that we're showing you could be certain modules that might be relevant, or at least hopefully you guys take away something that could be best practices that you're envisioning for the future in 2023 and beyond. But in my opinion, a lot of companies are using some way of reporting who's giving out recognition, who's receiving it, or even sending out a survey. Who represents the core values within the organization? So I can give them a shout out during a town hall meeting, actually adds value in terms of the culture. So it doesn't necessarily always need to be a rewards component, but we've seen a lot of adoption around this, especially when someone hits a milestone like an anniversary, Tom. But again, be creative. That's what you guys are there for, to create in terms of being creative, to know the employees, to recognize them. And that's a good way of giving positive feedback, because then it's going to be a domino effect whereby I want to be recognized for a job well done. And I've seen this with my CEO, Tom, whereby, she's given me chief closer award. She's given me badges in the past. And, sometimes a pat on the shoulder, it goes a long way compared to sometimes a merit increase.
Absolutely. And again, another quick plug for our tools. We do let you customize these with your core values, as Peter mentioned, images, titles. We give you a bunch of these out of the box. But also, one of the things that's great is having that intranet, or that place where employees can not only get to know the company, but get to know each other as well. So one thing we always encourage companies to do is if you're going to have an intranet, or you're going to have a system to house all this information, that you have a place for employees to not only talk about themselves, but share things like their skills, languages they might speak, their hobbies and interests. One of the things Peter knows our CEO is famous for is pulling up people's HelloTeam profiles on their first all hands meeting and having them tell us a little bit more about themselves. So it's really good to have a house for that information. But for you as HR and for you as people leaders, the real value in having that is that you can actually sift through it when something comes up. Maybe there's a giant role that's opening. Maybe this employee is ready for the next level. Maybe you need someone for that role that speaks Spanish. If you go through the list of all your employees, you can get to know their skill sets. You can search through them, really see who's ready to grow based on not only their performance feedback, but their skill sets as well. And that will really help you grow from within versus always having to hire from the outside, which we all know can be very expensive and very costly, especially when you're not retaining people. But another thing that we really haven't touched on much, Peter, is after you have all that feedback, development and what happens next. So one of the things that we have a great tool in HelloTeam is a full-featured learning management system. So companies out there are doing learning varying from all different levels. Some companies are great about it, and they're doing courses for employees. They're trying to grow people on their skill sets. Some companies are just starting with a basic level of compliance. Maybe our state requires us to do sexual harassment training, or it requires us to do diversity and inclusion training. So, or maybe we want to proactively do those things as a company, but we don't want to roll out a full catalog. So this is definitely a way that if you have an LMS, you can actually accomplish best of both worlds, get that compliance training done, but also have a place for people to learn about things they might want to learn about. I know one of the great parts about our internal LMS is we have a lot of these catalogs built. And this is for our own employees. If people want to learn about managing conflict, they can click in and enroll themselves at any time, not wait for HR to enroll them. If managers want to go in and learn a little bit more about how to manage people better, this is something that we can actually help them with and that we can let them enroll themselves into. So really good to have that L&D component. But also for you as HR, it helps make a great cost case for training. So if you have a system to do all this training, you're going to get reports around it. You're going to be able to see what is popular amongst my employees. What are people taking advantage of? What courses did I think they were going to take advantage of, but they're not because they're just not interested. It's really good to have all of this stuff in front of you. So when it comes time to make that case, maybe you want to hire an L&D person, maybe you want to buy a new catalog, you want to enroll the company in more training. You're going to have the data to back that up. Also critical for employee growth. You're going to save money growing for people from within. Peter and I live and breathe this every day. Always trying to promote our own staff versus bringing in someone from the outside because it's good for the company and obviously good for culture as well. And then finally, I think the most important part, especially if you're going to have an LMS, is that you have a way to assess employee learning. We've all taken trainings, we've all sat on webinars, hopefully not this one, where we're just kind of in the background, we have it playing, we don't actually get to the heart of, what are we supposed to be learning and are we learning it? That's where having different modules, self-paced training can be great, but also having tests and assessments to back that up. And then you, again, as HR, are going to be able to see who's passing these courses. Are people doing well in these? Have they been certified in the things I need them to be certified in? So obviously a big time saver, but definitely, like I said, a good cost justification as well. The last quick thing I'll show you here too is if you're going to do training, it's really good to give people certificates or some sort of award so they feel good after the fact. Ours in particular will generate these certificates automatically, and then you can add them to LinkedIn. So that can be a really great way to let people, encourage them to let the world know that they took this training and they're now certified.
Yeah, I've seen a spike in terms of what we're delivering for training because a lot of companies are realizing they need to do some sort of anti-sexual harassment training to that of like diversity training. We're able to facilitate this all into one platform. But to me, again, it comes back to what the resounding thing is. If you guys don't have the best practices, hopefully you're taking some tidbits away from this in terms of like, how can I consolidate the different solutions that my company might need when it comes to managing those employees that are most important. And in my opinion, again, I'm being biased, Tom, a lot of times systems are out there that they're clunky or they're using different ways of having multiple passwords because I have to go to multiple systems for maybe learning or performance or surveys. You can house it all into one platform. That's the real true value that a company like us is delivering companies and organizations, because I value the fact that we're working with some best in breed HR folks, and they're always dealing with the idea of how can I contain my budgets? How can I get the best for my employees? And then make a case for us to like advance people. And a tool like ours could achieve all three aspects that HR folks are challenged with right now in 2023, especially the budget cuts have gone down, have happened, and they're trying to like understand their workforce better, especially that a lot of folks are remote.
Absolutely. And just in case anyone's interested, I did launch a poll to see if anyone wants to learn more about HelloTeam, but I will also share this in the chat. If you want to get in touch directly, feel free to fill out the form there. So while we're going through this, we talked about surveys, we talked about one-on-ones and performance and all this great stuff. But another communication piece, something that a lot of companies, I think, struggle with, is an org chart, right? And it seems simple, and we all think it's simple. It's PowerPoint or whatever it is, but it becomes so unwieldy to manage. I mean, I think once you pass 5 employees, they don't fit on the slide anymore. And then you're making department ones, and then someone leaves or someone comes and it's not up to date. So it's really good to have a centralized place, especially for employee communication, where they can go through the org chart of a company, find anybody they might need to, and definitely see how this reporting structure cascades through the organization. So what you're seeing here, ours maintains itself. We actually use the data that's in your ADP or that's in your Bamboo HR, or whatever other provider you have. We use that same information to build this out so you don't have to. But regardless of what you're using, it's really important that employees can easily get in touch with one another. They can get an overview, get someone's email on the fly, almost like a directory. But also for you as HR professionals, that you can then report to the board, to your executive team at your all hands meeting on what the org chart looks like and easily export it in a way that you can put it into a PowerPoint or a presentation, whatever you need. So something we facilitate there. So again, just want to encourage everyone, ask some questions. We're going to definitely get to those at the end, and definitely talk about those a little bit more. We are coming up on time here. So in a few minutes, we're going to show those HRCI and SHRM codes. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen for a moment. And I want to, just stop here. And obviously, Peter's been a great resource in all of this today. And why don't we check some of the questions that have come in so far? Awesome. So Peter, do you think it's helpful for companies to have a place on mobile that people can fill out surveys, or do you think desktop's enough and people, are generally comfortable going on a desktop computer?
I think it's a bit of both. A lot of companies are moving towards the smartphone applications because if they're working remote, if I need to go to an office location or depending on the workforce, really it comes down to the individual company themselves. But what we've seen a lot of times is it could be basically a balancing act based on the client. So I would say it's 50-50.
Yeah, and the good thing about us too is we do actually have a mobile app. So if you did want to facilitate it on mobile, we definitely can. I appreciate that question. And it's definitely something we can do. What are sort of participation rates that you want to see average in a survey? Is one question that did come across here is what should I be looking for as far as participation rate in a survey? And I have some thoughts, but I don't know, Peter, if you want to take this one first.
Again, it depends on the questions that you're soliciting.
Yeah.
And it really, again, we've seen it range depending on the industry. What have you seen as the common percentage, Tom, in terms of like, again, I've seen not-for-profits give more voice in terms of those, that they'll get a percentage if people are getting pinged continuously. But I've seen a lot of times surveys below 20% because they're not getting reminders. And they're not also articulating why the survey is important. Because a lot of times I'm going to have survey nausea. It's like getting a survey.
Yeah.
Give you an example. If I'm getting a survey for my dealership, I'm going to get continuously pinged for the service that's been done for me. That's not what people, that's how people always look at surveys. It's more about like sitting down with the organization as a whole and explain to them why those survey results are important. That's where the feedback comes in and would spike the percentages that you will receive in terms of that feedback. And we've seen that internally in terms of the clients that we service, whereby sitting down with the client's employees and explain to them why the survey is important, we've seen it either be at 50% to that of 75% of survey participation. Even rewarding people for completing a survey sometimes add value because then I'm getting a better understanding of how can I improve culture or drive growth.
Absolutely. And I will tell you the gold standard. So for anyone wondering, is typically 90% or higher of your employee base. Now that can seem really daunting if you're 1,000-person company that at least 900 people have filled it out. So Peter brought up, I think, the most important point. Why are we doing the survey? It's all about getting to the why. If your employees don't understand why you're doing this or why this is important, then they're not going to fill it out. They're not going to spend time. But I think beyond even that, what's equally important is what you're doing with the results. So I will tell you, we've had some companies start in our tool that have a 50 to 60% completion rate, and that's not good enough for them. But what they do is they take those results, they act on the feedback. And as employees see, especially HR, make changes because of things they said or things that they expressed they wanted to do, you're going to see that participation rate climb up because all of a sudden there's a trust factor that plays in. I trust that not only is my company getting this feedback because they want it, but because they're actually going to use it to make my time at work better, my workday a little bit more enjoyable, even something as simple as coffee in the break room, which Peter and I joke does come up a lot on surveys, especially for those in the office. And I think he hit home with that dealership example, right? If you're bombarding people and you're nauseating them with survey after survey, you're going to see that participation rate plummet because people are just going to get sick of giving that feedback. So with that, we are at the 45 mark. I'm going to go ahead and share the HRCI and SHRM codes here. I do want to thank Peter for taking time out of his extremely busy day to actually sit with us and have this discussion. I also want to thank all of you for joining us today and definitely stay tuned for future webinars. Don't forget to answer yes or no on the ending poll if you're interested in learning more about HelloTeam. And if you want to book time with us directly, we did put that link in the chat. So with that, thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and leave this up here for a few minutes. And Peter, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today.
Have a great Thanksgiving, folks. Cheers.